January 8, 1904. London still whispered of the grandest wedding in a century, but the bride was alone, and the groom had vanished. Lady Evelyn Harcourt pressed her trembling hands against the embroidered coverlet of the vast bed, the weight of silence pressing in on her from all sides. The candlelight flickered weakly against the dark wood-panelled walls, casting shadows that stretched like accusing fingers toward her. Every surface gleamed with wealth, mahogany carved in intricate patterns, velvet curtains embroidered with gold thread, a chandelier heavy with crystal droplets that caught the faintest light. Yet despite its grandeur, the room felt unbearably empty. She had imagined this chamber as the beginning of her new life. She had envisioned laughter echoing in these walls, whispered words of intimacy, the uncertain sweetness of a first kiss as husband and wife. Instead, all she had was the ghost of his voice, cool and final as steel. "You'll spend our honeymoon alone." The words replayed endlessly, a cruel refrain. Her heart had lurched when he said it, and she had half hoped he would smile afterward, admit it was some kind of jest, his way of teasing her nerves. But no smile came. His jaw had been set, his eyes unreadable pools of shadow, and then he had left her standing there, the scent of his cologne, bergamot and musk, lingering long after the door closed. Now, Evelyn sat alone in the marital bed, surrounded by cold sheets that had not known his touch. Outside, beyond the tall windows, the city slumbered beneath a brittle frost. The world should have been hers that night. She should have been kissed beneath the stars, carried into his arms, cherished as the Duchess of Ashbourne. Instead, she was a prisoner of silence. The sound of distant carriage wheels on cobblestone reached her faintly, followed by a ripple of laughter from late revellers returning home from the grand reception. Their joy stabbed her like a blade. For them, the wedding had been nothing less than a triumph, a spectacle of silk gowns, champagne toasts, and whispered envy. The most desired duke had chosen her, Evelyn Harcourt, the ruined daughter of a disgraced line, and yet he had not chosen her at all. Her throat tightened. She pressed her fingers to her lips, willing back tears that threatened to undo her composure. She could not cry, not now, not in the first hours of her new life. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp as ever. "Endure, Evelyn, appear flawless. If you are not perfect, you will be discarded." So Evelyn straightened her spine, though it felt as though the weight of the room was crushing her. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, as if sitting in judgment before the whole of society, and whispered to herself, "I will not be invisible, not now, not ever." Somewhere in the house, footsteps echoed faintly. The Duke's servants, no doubt. Did they know? Did they whisper among themselves about their master's cold dismissal of his bride? Evelyn's cheeks burned hot at the thought. She imagined the kitchens alive with speculation, the maids trading glances as they polished silver, the footmen smirking behind gloved hands. A duchess unwanted on her wedding night. What greater scandal could there be? The thought made her stomach twist. But worse than the servants' gossip would be society itself. Already London salons feasted on every scrap of scandal, and Evelyn's marriage had been the season's greatest triumph. By morning, whispers would spread like fire through dry grass. The Duke of Ashbourne married and abandoned. Would they blame her? They always did. Perhaps they would call her unworthy of him, too plain, too timid, too weak. Perhaps they would say she had failed to charm him, failed to hold his interest, failed to rise to her station. Her nails dug into her palms until they left half-moon marks. She wanted to scream, to tear down the velvet curtains, to shatter the fragile glass of the chandelier and let it rain down around her. Anything to drown out the echo of that single sentence. "You'll spend our honeymoon alone." Her mind, desperate for refuge, drifted back to the day itself, the wedding that had begun like a fairy tale. The chapel had been ablaze with candlelight, the scent of roses thick in the air. Gold leaf gleamed on the arches, and 1,000 eyes had fixed upon her as she walked the aisle. Evelyn remembered the rustle of her gown, the delicate lace of her veil trembling with every step. She had clung to her bouquet as though it could anchor her against the weight of expectation, and at the end of that long aisle he had stood. Alexander, Duke of Ashbourne, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence alone commanding silence. He was as striking as the rumors had promised, dark hair brushing his collar, eyes like storm clouds, mouth set in a line that promised both power and restraint. The Ton called him the most desired man in England, the one every family schemed to ensnare for their daughters. And somehow, impossibly, he had chosen her. Or so she thought. He had spoken his vows with a steady voice, his hand firm as it took hers. Yet even then there had been something in his gaze, a shadow, a distance she could not name. She had told herself it was nerves, that marriage was a burden even dukes must shoulder. But now, alone in this empty bed, she saw it for what it was. Retreat. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking each moment of her solitude. Midnight passed. Then 1 o'clock. Each chime seemed to mock her, a cruel reminder of the hours slipping away while she sat untouched, unwanted. At last, unable to bear the silence, Evelyn rose. She crossed the chamber, her bare feet brushing against the plush carpet, and moved to the writing desk near the window. Her reflection wavered in the glass. A pale bride in a gown of ivory silk, jewels still at her throat, eyes rimmed red from unshed tears. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. On the desk, a silver tray held a scattering of unopened letters, congratulations from distant relatives and eager acquaintances. Evelyn's gaze snagged on the bold seal of a scandal sheet tucked beneath them. Someone had left it there, perhaps thoughtlessly. Her breath caught as she unfolded the page. There, splashed across the headline in cruel black letters, "The Duke of Ashbourne weds, then abandons his bride." The paper slipped from her fingers. It had already begun. The whispers, the judgment, the ruin. The city did not even wait until dawn. Her chest tightened, breath stuttering against the weight of it. Already she could see the pitying stares, hear the sharp-edged laughter, feel the crushing humiliation of being branded unwanted. And yet, beneath the panic, beneath the shame, a spark ignited. Small, defiant, but real. She would not crumble. She would not let them see her broken. Evelyn Harcourt might be unwanted by her husband, mocked by society, hunted by gossip, but she would rise. She pressed her palm against the glass of the window, the frost biting against her skin, and whispered into the silence, "If I must be his Duchess, I will not be invisible." The morning after the wedding dawned grey, the sky swollen with clouds that threatened snow. Evelyn stirred at the sound of church bells in the distance, their solemn chimes seeming to toll not for celebration, but for mourning. She sat up slowly, her body stiff, her mind still wrapped in the fog of disbelief. The bed remained as untouched as the night before, its emptiness echoing louder than any words her husband had spoken. She moved to the mirror, her reflection pale against the gilded frame. The jewels still at her throat glared back at her, mocking reminders of the price she had paid. Her hair, loosened from its pins, spilled across her shoulders, but there was nothing soft or romantic about the sight. She looked like a woman who had been dressed for display and then discarded. Her fingers shook as she lifted the comb, trying to restore some semblance of composure, because she knew soon the house would stir, and with it, the eyes of servants who had seen far too much already. A knock at the door made her jump. It was softer than she expected, almost hesitant. She turned and found Margaret, her maid, slipping inside with a tray. The girl's eyes were wide, her lips pressed together as if holding back questions. Evelyn forced herself to sit straighter, arranging the folds of her robe with deliberate grace. "Good morning, Your Grace," Margaret said carefully, setting the tray down. The title cut like a blade. Evelyn had dreamt of being called Duchess, of stepping into a role that would restore her family's pride. Now it felt like a mask she had no right to wear. "You need not look at me with pity," Evelyn murmured, reaching for the teacup though her hand still trembled. The porcelain rattled faintly against the saucer. "He left, yes, but I remain." Margaret dipped her head quickly, but Evelyn saw the flicker of sympathy all the same. It was everywhere now, she realized, in every glance, every pause, every silence. Sympathy was worse than ridicule, because it meant they all knew, and knowing meant the whispers had already begun. Later, when she descended to breakfast, The truth struck her like a blow. The dining room, long and grand, seemed emptier than she had ever seen it. The Duke's place at the head of the table was untouched, his chair stiff and waiting. Evelyn sat where she was guided, every movement observed by servants who pretended not to see. She forced herself to lift her fork, to take a bite, though she tasted nothing. By mid-morning, the news reached her mother. The Countess Harcourt arrived in a flurry of carriages, her expression pinched with restrained fury. She swept into Evelyn's chamber without knocking, skirts rustling like a storm. "What have you done?" her mother demanded, her voice low but sharp. Evelyn rose slowly, the teacup in her hand forgotten on the sill. Nothing. He—" Her throat closed around the words. She would not say them aloud. Not yet. The Countess advanced, eyes narrowing. "Do not speak foolishness. Do you think society will care for your excuses? They will say you failed to please him. They will say you were inadequate." Evelyn's spine stiffened. "And what would you have me do? Chase him through the streets like some desperate waif? I am his wife, whether he wants me or not." Her mother's gaze softened only a fraction, though her mouth remained hard. "You will endure. You will smile when they sneer. You will hold your head high because if you falter, you drag us all down with you. Remember, Evelyn, our name hangs by a thread. You were supposed to mend it." The words landed like stones. Evelyn wanted to scream that she had married for duty, not desire, that she had bound herself to a man who could not even share her wedding night. But the Countess's eyes glittered with unyielding expectation, and Evelyn swallowed her protest like poison. That evening, the first whispers reached her ears. Lady Beatrice arrived with a bouquet of lilies, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "How radiant you looked yesterday," she cooed, "though I must say I was surprised not to see the Duke this morning. Such a pity he had business already. Still, I'm sure he will return soon." The false sweetness in her voice made Evelyn's stomach twist. Beatrice was not there to offer kindness. She was there to carry a fresh scrap of gossip back to the drawing rooms of Mayfair. Evelyn endured it with a brittle smile, thanking her for the flowers, though she could almost hear the whispers forming behind her back. Unwanted bride, discarded duchess. When the door closed, Evelyn pressed her palms to her temples, breath trembling. She could not hide forever. London would demand appearances, and appearances would demand perfection. The Duke's absence would not be forgiven or forgotten. It would be dissected, twisted, magnified, until every salon rang with her shame. That night, she sat by the fire in her chamber, the flames casting her shadow high against the walls. Margaret had gone to fetch warm linens, leaving her alone with her thoughts. On the small table lay a letter from her cousin Clara, unopened. Evelyn stared at it, the seal unbroken. She already knew what it would say. Congratulations laced with curiosity, subtle probes for secrets. Instead, her eyes drifted to the shelves where the Duke kept his private books. She should not have looked. She knew it. Yet something in her chest urged her forward, a whisper that told her if she could not have his presence, she might at least have some piece of his truth. Her fingers traced the spines until she found one volume slightly out of place. She pulled it free, and from between the pages a folded letter slipped to the floor. Her heart thudded as she bent to pick it up. The paper was thick, the seal broken long ago. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were legible. "My dearest Catherine, forgive me for the distance. Forgive me for failing you when you needed me most. If I could trade places with you, I would. If I could carry your burden, I would. Instead, I watched you fade, and I—" The letter ended abruptly, the page torn. Evelyn's breath caught. Catherine, his first wife. The rumors had always lingered, whispers of neglect, of cruelty, of secrets buried in that marriage. And here, in his own hand, was a confession of guilt. Not cruelty, but guilt so heavy it seeped into his very words. Evelyn pressed the letter to her chest, her pulse racing. So this was why he left her. Not hatred, not rejection. Fear. He feared he would destroy her as he believed he had destroyed Catherine. Her eyes stung, but she held back tears. For the first time since the wedding, she felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not joy, but the faintest flicker of understanding. The next day, society confirmed her worst fears. In the marketplace, as her carriage rolled by, she caught the stares of women clustered near the milliners. Their whispers rose and fell like a cruel melody, accompanied by quick glances in her direction. At the dressmaker's, the seamstress clucked politely, but could not resist the tightening of her mouth when Evelyn mentioned the Duke. Even the vicar, in passing, asked after her husband, with just enough pause to make the question sting. By the time she returned home, her composure was cracking. She swept through the front doors with her chin high, but as soon as the corridor was empty, she sagged against the wall, every nerve raw with humiliation. That night, she dreamed of him. She dreamed of his eyes, stormy and unreadable, of his mouth tightening as if holding back words he dared not speak. She dreamed of reaching for him, of almost touching him, only for him to step back into darkness. She woke with her heart pounding, the sheets damp from restless tossing. Days blurred into weeks, and each day carried new challenges. Invitations arrived to balls and dinners, all addressed to the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne. Evelyn attended alone, wearing gowns chosen to dazzle, jewels to distract. She danced with strangers, smiled at flatterers, endured the thinly veiled pity of women who longed to see her fall. And each night she returned to the vast empty chambers where her husband's absence echoed like thunder. Yet something inside her refused to surrender. Each cruel whisper only hardened her resolve. She would not be the invisible bride. She would not fade into the background, while Lady Selina and her ilk sharpened their claws. One evening, she stood before the mirror as Margaret fastened a sapphire necklace around her throat. "Do you think they see me as a fool?" Evelyn asked softly. Margaret paused, meeting her gaze in the glass. "They see what you let them see, my lady. If you walk into that ballroom as though you are abandoned, they will believe it. But if you walk in as though you belong, if you look as though you have nothing to fear, they will wonder what you know that they do not." Evelyn studied her reflection, the shimmer of the necklace catching firelight. She thought of the letter, of the words Alexander had left unsaid. Perhaps she knew more than anyone else. Perhaps she alone had seen the truth hidden beneath his silence. That night, when she entered Lady Worthington's ball, she did so with her chin lifted and her eyes steady. The chandeliers blazed above her, music swelled, and the crowd turned as one to watch the Duchess who had been abandoned. Evelyn felt their gazes like heat on her skin, but she did not falter. She glided forward, every step measured, her smile slight but unyielding. At the edge of the ballroom, Lady Selina Crawford observed her with a predatory smile. Widowhood had not dimmed her beauty. If anything, it had sharpened it, given her an air of experience that young debutantes could never match. She raised her glass in mock salute, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. Evelyn met her gaze and inclined her head with icy poise. The duel had begun. The ballroom glimmered with candlelight and crystal, every chandelier dripping with jewels of fire. Music surged, violins bowing out a waltz that should have carried Evelyn into a dream. But the moment she crossed the threshold, she knew this night would be anything but gentle. Eyes followed her with predatory fascination, ladies fluttering fans to hide smirks, gentlemen murmuring behind gloves, the air thick with unspoken scandal. She moved as though carved from marble, every step deliberate, chin lifted, her sapphire necklace flashing defiance with each breath. She had not expected him to be here. She had not expected Alexander at all. And yet, there he stood across the ballroom, framed by gilt columns and velvet drapery, tall and immovable as if the room bent around him. The Duke of Ashbourne, her husband in title but not in presence. The crowd parted for him like the sea, whispers growing louder, hearts beating faster, as if the devil himself had stepped into their midst. Evelyn's chest constricted, her pulse racing in a traitorous rhythm. It had been weeks since their wedding night, weeks of empty rooms and colder beds. And now here he was, his gaze cutting through the room to her like a blade. She told herself she would not falter. She told herself she would not show the ache he caused. But when his eyes locked with hers, storm-grey and endless, she felt her breath stumble. He looked at her as though she were both stranger and salvation, as though he had tried to forget her and failed. Lady Selina materialized at his side like a shadow given form, her gown the colour of midnight, her hand resting lightly on his arm as though it belonged there. Evelyn's heart lurched. The widow's lips curved in a smile sharp enough to wound. She leaned close to Alexander, whispering something that drew his mouth into a grim line. Then Selina glanced toward Evelyn, triumph flashing in her gaze, and Evelyn understood. Selina wanted the world to see her at his side. She wanted the scandal to deepen until Evelyn was no more than a discarded ornament. Evelyn refused to give her the satisfaction. She swept into the room, her gown gliding like silk water, her expression composed though her blood burned. Men bowed, women curtsied, but all of them watched, hungry for her reaction. She gave them none. She smiled faintly as though she knew some secret they did not, as though her husband's presence at Selina's side meant nothing at all. The music shifted, couples spilling onto the dance floor. Evelyn did not wait to be asked. She turned toward Lord Weston, a gentleman known for his courteous manners, and extended her hand. He looked startled but pleased, guiding her into the waltz. Gasps rippled around the room, the abandoned Duchess dancing as though nothing were amiss. Evelyn let the rhythm carry her, her body graceful, her smile unreadable. She was not the victim they wanted her to be. But she felt his gaze. Alexander's stare followed her with every turn, his jaw tightening, his posture rigid. Even across the sea of dancers she could feel the tension radiating from him, as if her very existence on another man's arm cut him to the quick. She wanted to savor it. She wanted him to feel the sting of her absence as she had felt his. Yet beneath the defiance, her heart twisted with longing. She wanted him to cross the room, to claim her, to silence the whispers with a single touch. When the dance ended, Lord Weston bowed gallantly, but before Evelyn could respond, the crowd shifted. Alexander had moved. He strode across the floor with the measured power of a man who owned every inch of space, his gaze never leaving hers. Whispers surged like a storm at sea. By the time he reached her, silence had fallen, the air crackling with anticipation. "Duchess," he said, his voice low, velvet over steel. His hand extended, gloved and steady. "Dance with me." Evelyn's heart pounded so loudly, she feared the entire room could hear it. Every eye was upon her, waiting for her humiliation or her triumph. She inclined her head with a grace that belied the trembling inside her and placed her hand in his. The music began again, and suddenly they were alone in a crowded room, spinning across the floor in perfect unison. His hand pressed firmly at her back, guiding her, his touch searing even through layers of silk. Evelyn struggled to keep her composure, to hide the storm inside her chest. "You left me," she whispered, her lips barely moving. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed ahead. "I had to." Her throat constricted. "Had to? Do you know what they say of me now? Do you know the whispers I endure?" He turned his face slightly, his breath brushing her temple. "Better they speak of you than bury you." Her steps faltered, the dance nearly broken. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. His grip tightened instead, pulling her closer, his eyes burning with unspoken torment. For a moment, the facade cracked, and she saw it. The guilt, the fear, the weight he carried like chains. And then it was gone, hidden behind the cold mask of the Duke once more. The dance ended, applause echoing hollowly. Alexander released her hand, but not her gaze. He bowed stiffly, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the center of the floor, her breath shuddering, her heart raw. The crowd erupted in whispers again, and Evelyn forced herself to glide from the floor with dignity. Inside, she was breaking apart. Later, she wandered from the ballroom, the air suffocating with perfume and judgment. The corridor was dim, the sconces casting a golden haze against the wallpaper. She pressed her palms to the cool surface, her body trembling. That was when she heard it, the soft creak of a door down the hall. She turned and saw him. Alexander stood in the shadows, his hand braced against the wall, his head bowed as though burdened by demons. Evelyn's heart stuttered. She should have walked away. She should have left him to his secrets. But her feet carried her forward, each step echoing in the silence until she stood before him. "Why did you marry me if you meant to abandon me?" she asked, her voice breaking despite her will. His head lifted slowly, his eyes storm-dark, haunted. "Because I needed you," he said, voice raw. "And because I swore I would never hurt another woman again." She searched his face, desperate for truth. He looked at her as though torn apart, as though he had been starving and she was both his hunger and his salvation. He stepped closer, his hand rising as though to touch her cheek, but at the last second, he pulled back, fingers curling into a fist. "You should not be near me," he whispered. "You do not know what I have done." Her breath trembled. "Then tell me, so I may choose whether to stand beside you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. His lips parted, words hovering, but then footsteps echoed down the hall, voices approaching. He stepped back, retreating into the shadows. When the guests appeared, Evelyn stood alone, her gown glittering, her heart hollow. The Duke had vanished once more, leaving her with questions that burned like fire. And somewhere in the ballroom, Lady Selina Crawford watched with a smile, knowing the cracks were widening. The days that followed the ball unfurled like a storm held barely at bay. Grey skies heavy above the estate, the air swollen with the promise of thunder. Evelyn could not shake the memory of Alexander's words, nor the look in his eyes when he had held her on the dance floor, haunted, desperate, as though torn between claiming her and pushing her away forever. That conflict lived in her now, coiling like a restless serpent, keeping her awake long into the nights. One afternoon, the heavens opened with a sudden roar, rain lashing against the tall windows of Ashbourne Hall. Evelyn had been in the library trying to lose herself in a novel when Margaret rushed in with word that the horses needed calming and the Duke had gone out into the storm. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before rising, skirts in hand. Something deep inside compelled her forward, an instinct stronger than fear, stronger than propriety. She found him in the stables, drenched through, his hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt sleeves soaked as he worked to steady a frantic stallion. The air smelled of wet hay and leather, the sharp scent of rain clinging to everything. For a moment she stood in the doorway, her heart slamming against her ribs, watching him move with such raw strength and quiet command. "Alexander," she called softly, her voice nearly lost beneath the pounding rain. He turned sharply, surprise flashing across his features before being replaced by guarded calm. "You should not be here." "Why?" "Because I might see you as you are, rather than the mask you wear." She stepped closer, her shoes sinking into the damp straw. "You cannot hide from me forever." His jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. "You don't understand what you ask." "Then help me understand." She moved closer still, until only the restless horse separated them. The animal shifted nervously, but Alexander soothed it with a steady hand. Evelyn's breath caught at the tenderness of the gesture. "You left me," she whispered. "You left me to face their whispers alone, but you look at me as though you want nothing more than to stay." For a heartbeat, something unguarded flickered in his eyes. His lips parted, but before he could answer, a clap of thunder shook the earth. The horse reared violently, nearly breaking free of its tether. Evelyn gasped, instinct propelling her forward. Without thinking, Alexander pulled her into his arms, shielding her from flailing hooves. The world seemed to freeze in that instant. His chest pressed against hers, his breath hot against her temple, his arms iron-strong around her body. She felt the thunder of his heartbeat through the soaked fabric, steady and fierce. For a moment, she forgot the storm, the scandal, the world itself. All that existed was him. Then he released her abruptly, stepping back as though burned. "This is what I fear," he said hoarsely, "that if I hold you, I will not let go, and if I do not let go, I will destroy you." Her lips trembled, her heart aching. "You cannot destroy me, Alexander." only abandon me." His gaze locked with hers, fierce and unyielding, but he said nothing more. The storm raged on, drowning out the silence between them. That evening, Evelyn could not keep the encounter from her mind. She sat by her chamber window, watching lightning split the sky, her fingers tracing the edge of the letter she had found. The unfinished words to Catherine. Each line haunted her now, pressing questions into her soul. Had Catherine truly died because of him, or had grief twisted his memory into guilt too heavy to bear? The days after the storm pressed them into proximity. Alexander could no longer vanish as easily as before. The roads were washed out, the estate closed in on itself. Meals were shared, albeit in silence, yet even silence spoke, each glance across the table, each brush of movement in the hall carrying more weight than words. Evelyn began to notice things, the way he paused before entering a room if he knew she was there, the way his hand lingered on the back of a chair after she had touched it, the shadows beneath his eyes that deepened when their gazes met. One evening, trapped together by weather in the drawing room, Evelyn dared to break the stillness. She sat at the pianoforte, fingers trembling against ivory keys, and began to play. The melody was soft, uncertain, but it filled the air with something fragile and alive. She felt his presence behind her before she saw him. "That was her favorite song," he murmured, his voice low, unsteady. Her fingers stilled. She turned slowly, finding him standing by the mantel, the firelight casting shadows across his face. He looked younger in that moment, stripped of the Duke's impenetrable armor. "Catherine's," he said, almost to himself. "She played it every evening, even when she could barely lift her hands. And I was too busy to listen." The words sliced through Evelyn, not because they were cruel, but because they were soaked in regret. She rose from the bench, moving closer to him, her gown whispering across the carpet. "You loved her," she said softly. "I failed her." His voice cracked on the words. "I failed her, and she died believing she was alone." Evelyn's chest tightened, tears pricking at her eyes. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. He flinched at the touch but did not step away. "You are not failing me now," she whispered, "unless you keep running." For a long moment, they stood in silence, her hand light against his arm, his breath ragged. Then, with a suddenness that stole her breath, he caught her wrist gently, his thumb grazing the inside of her palm. The touch was electric, searing through her like fire. "Evelyn," he murmured, her name like a plea, a warning, a prayer. He leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching, his breath mingling with hers. She could feel the tremor in him, the battle waging beneath his skin. For a heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her. But he pulled back, anguish etched across his face. "If I take you into this darkness, you will never escape it." Her voice trembled. "What if I do not want to escape? What if I only want you?" He closed his eyes, as though the words pained him more than any wound. Then he turned abruptly, striding from the room, leaving her trembling in the firelight, her lips parted with unshed words. That night, she lay awake, the storm inside her louder than the one that battered the windows. She had glimpsed his truth, tasted his torment, and though it left her raw, it also bound her tighter to him. For the first time, she felt not only abandoned, but chosen. Chosen in the very act of his restraint, chosen in the way he warred against himself for her sake. And yet, beyond the estate walls, society's whispers grew louder. Lady Selina's voice, honeyed and venomous, began to thread its way through every salon. The Duke regrets his bride. The Duchess is nothing more than a stand-in. Evelyn heard it all, each word another weight upon her shoulders. But when she closed her eyes, she thought of his hand against hers, the tremor in his voice, the storm in his gaze. She could endure their cruelty. She could endure being unwanted by the world. What she could not endure was losing the chance to stand beside him, to draw him back from the abyss he had lived in too long. As thunder rolled once more, Evelyn whispered into the darkness, her vow as fierce as it was fragile. "I will not let you face this storm alone." The rain ceased at last, leaving the grounds of Ashbourne Hall drenched and gleaming, the world washed clean. Yet inside the house the air remained heavy, thick with secrets. Evelyn felt it in every glance Alexander cast her way, every silence between them. They orbited each other like twin stars caught in opposing pulls, drawn close, then driven apart by forces neither of them dared name aloud. An invitation arrived that morning on silvered parchment, bearing the unmistakable crest of Lady Selina Crawford, a masquerade ball 3 nights hence. Evelyn's hand trembled as she unfolded the note, the ink shimmering with calculated charm. To celebrate the season and honor the esteemed Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne, the words tasted like poison. Selina's intent was clear: to parade their fractured marriage before society's eager eyes, to peel back dignity and expose Evelyn as the unwanted bride. Alexander stood at her side as she read. His face betrayed nothing, but his fist tightened at his side. "We will not go," he said firmly. Evelyn lifted her chin. "If we do not, she wins. If I hide, they will say I am ashamed. I will not give them that." He looked at her then, really looked, his storm-grey eyes filled with something between admiration and fear. "You have more courage than I deserve," he murmured. That evening, Evelyn found herself drawn again to the letter she had discovered weeks earlier, Catherine's name bleeding across the page in his hand. She sat by the fire, the flames painting shadows across her face, reading the unfinished words until they blurred. Margaret entered quietly, placing fresh tea at her side. The maid hesitated before speaking. "My lady, the servants whisper of her, of Catherine." Evelyn's heart lurched. "What do they say? That she died in childbirth?" Margaret's eyes softened. "They say the child was stillborn and she never recovered." The room tilted. The air thickened, choking Evelyn with grief that was not hers, but pressed upon her as though it were. No wonder Alexander carried such guilt. No wonder he had buried himself in silence. He had lost not only a wife, but a child. Later, when the household had gone still, Evelyn found him in the study, a glass of brandy in hand, staring at the fire as though it held answers. She stood in the doorway, unsure if he would send her away again, but he did not look up, and so she stepped inside. "Catherine," she whispered, her voice trembling. His head jerked, the glass clinking against the table. He turned to her, eyes blazing with something wild. "Who told you?" "I found your letter," she admitted softly. "And Margaret." She spoke of what the servants whisper. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "Damnation!" He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the room. "I should have burned it. I should have destroyed every trace." Evelyn moved closer, her skirts whispering over the rug. "Why? To keep the truth buried with her, to punish yourself until the end of your days." His laugh was bitter, sharp. "Truth. The truth is that I killed her. I killed them both. My negligence, my pride. I was away when she fell into labor. I thought there would be time, I thought. God help me, I thought my duty at court outweighed my duty at her side. And by the time I returned, she was gone." His voice cracked, his body shaking with the weight of memory. "She begged for me and I was not there. That is the truth." Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. She crossed the space between them and caught his hands, forcing him to still. His skin was hot beneath hers, his pulse racing. "That is grief speaking, not truth. You cannot carry all the blame for what the world gives and takes. She was loved by you, Alexander. That is what mattered to her." His gaze searched hers desperately, as though looking for absolution he could not grant himself. Slowly he sank to the edge of the desk, his shoulders bowed. "If I take you into my arms, Evelyn, if I let myself love you, and fate steals you from me too, I will not survive it." Her breath trembled. "Then do not push me away. Let me stand beside you, so neither of us has to face fate alone." The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, almost imperceptibly, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles that seared through her like flame. It was not passion, not yet. It was surrender. The masquerade came swiftly. Evelyn dressed in silver silk, a mask of filigree hiding her eyes, her heart pounding with both dread and determination. When she descended the staircase, Alexander was waiting below, cloaked in black, his mask shadowing the torment in his gaze. For the first time since their wedding, he extended his arm without hesitation. Whispers followed them as they entered Lady Selina's glittering hall. The chandeliers blazed, masks gleamed, and everywhere Evelyn turned, eyes burned with hunger for scandal. Selina herself swept forward, a vision in crimson, her smile sharp enough to slice glass. "Your graces," she purred, dipping low. "How rare it is to see you together. We were beginning to wonder if the marriage was only for appearances." Alexander stiffened, but Evelyn squeezed his arm lightly. She leaned forward, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Appearances, Lady Selina, are often deceiving. Do be careful not to trip over your own." Gasps rippled, fans fluttered. Selina's smile faltered just for a moment. Evelyn felt triumph bloom in her chest. As the evening wore on, Evelyn and Alexander danced, their bodies close, their movements seamless. She felt his breath warm against her cheek, his hand steady at her back. In his eyes she saw not only torment, but the beginnings of something else, something fierce, something alive. But Selina was not done. Near midnight she stood before the crowd, her glass raised high. "A toast," she declared, her voice cutting through music and chatter. "To the Duke of Ashbourne, who buries wives more quickly than he takes them to bed." The room gasped. Evelyn froze, her blood turning to ice. Alexander's face went white, his jaw clenching in fury. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant, the weight of scandal ready to crash down upon them. Evelyn stepped forward before she could think, her voice clear and unwavering. "And yet here I stand, Lady Selina, not buried, not broken, chosen." Her eyes swept the crowd, her mask glinting like steel. "If you must gossip, at least choose a story worthy of the truth. My husband may grieve what he lost, but he does not abandon what he has." The hall erupted in murmurs, astonishment rippling like wildfire. Alexander's hand closed firmly around hers, his grip fierce with gratitude and something deeper. For the first time he did not pull away. Later, as they left the ball together, Evelyn felt his gaze upon her, raw and unguarded. In the privacy of the carriage, he reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek, his forehead pressing against hers. "You defended me," he whispered, voice breaking. "I will always defend you," she answered. And in that moment, as the city's lights flickered past, Evelyn knew the tide had turned. The Duke was no longer her captor, her judge, her absent husband. He was a man broken by loss, a man clawing his way back to life. And she would be the one to walk beside him into the storm. The days after the masquerade seemed touched with fragile light. For the first time since their vows, Evelyn and Alexander shared meals without silence, walks without distance, glances without the immediate weight of shame. The carriage ride home from Lady Selina's ball had changed something fundamental between them. He had looked at her not as the woman forced upon him, but as the only ally he could not afford to lose. And yet, peace in London society was never more than an illusion. The morning papers carried Selina's venom thinly disguised as speculation. Why had the Duke's first wife truly died? Why did the Duchess so desperately insist she was chosen? What did she know that we did not? Every word was crafted to inflame, to twist Evelyn's defense into a dangerous rumor. Invitations poured in, not for camaraderie but for spectacle. Everyone wanted to see whether the Duchess would stand firm or finally crumble. Evelyn bore it with chin high, though her stomach often twisted with dread. Each time she stepped into a drawing room, silence followed her like a shadow before whispers roared up again. She forced smiles, played her role, and reminded herself of the vow she had made. She would not let Alexander face the storm alone. But Alexander, he began to withdraw again. It started subtly, A missed supper, a closed study door, long rides across the estate with no explanation. Evelyn told herself he simply needed time, that grief did not fade in a single night. Yet when she pressed her palm against his arm one evening and felt him stiffen, as though her touch were a temptation he could not allow, fear clawed at her heart. One night when the house was quiet, she went to him. She found him in the west wing, the firelight low, brandy glass untouched on the table. He stared into the flames, his face pale, his eyes distant. "You've been avoiding me," she whispered, stepping into the room. He flinched, as if caught. "I am trying to protect you." "From what?" she asked, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "From yourself, from love, from the truth you cannot undo." His eyes blazed suddenly, the storm breaking loose. "From becoming another Catherine." His voice cracked like a whip, raw and unrestrained. "From lying cold in a grave because I was too blind to save you. I could not bear it, Evelyn. I could not watch it happen again." Her breath caught, the air shattering between them. She stepped forward, tears burning her eyes. "But you are killing me by inches instead. Every day you retreat. Every night you leave me alone. You bury me alive in shame. Do you not see? Your fear is the noose around my throat." Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. Better shame than a coffin. Her tears spilled freely now, sliding hot against her cheeks. "No, Alexander. Better love than either. Better truth, better pain, better everything than this half-life we are living." He said nothing. He only pressed his hand to the mantle, knuckles white, his back rigid. Evelyn stared at him, at the man she had begun to love, at the man tearing himself apart. Then, unable to bear it, she left, her skirts brushing angrily against the carpet as she fled. The days that followed became her darkest hours. Selina struck again, hosting a supper where she unveiled a cruelly forged letter, one claiming Catherine had written of neglect, of loneliness, of a husband who abandoned her. The letter spread like wildfire, whispered from lips to ears, until Evelyn could not set foot outside without feeling its poison. The Duke, already steeped in guilt, shut himself away. He neither denied nor defended. His silence spoke louder than any protest could. Evelyn faced it all alone. At Lady Worthington's tea, she sat amidst painted smiles, while women whispered within reach. Poor Duchess. Poor creature. He will leave her too, just as he left his first. At church, the vicar's sermon on faithfulness felt sharpened into an arrow aimed at her heart. In the market, even common folk stared, some with pity, others with cruel satisfaction. She returned home each evening hollowed, her courage eroded piece by piece. In her chambers, she removed her jewels slowly, staring into the mirror at a woman she no longer recognized. The sapphires sparkled, but her eyes were dull, her skin pale. She traced the pearls at her throat, the necklace heavy as a chain, and whispered into the silence, "Perhaps I was never meant to belong." On the third night, unable to breathe beneath the weight of humiliation, she stripped the necklace away, casting it onto the vanity. She removed the Duchess's jewels one by one, until only Evelyn remained, the girl who had once been hopeful, who had once believed marriage might be salvation. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed her hands against the cold glass of the mirror. "Maybe he will never choose me," she whispered, voice breaking. "Maybe I am meant to walk alone." Her reflection stared back, fragile and defeated. That night, she curled into the bed's corner, the sheets vast and empty, her body racked with silent sobs. For the first time since her marriage, she wondered if love was not worth the ruin. For the first time, despair whispered that perhaps Selina was right, that Evelyn Harcourt had been a fool to think she could save a man who would not save himself. The storm outside had passed, but inside Evelyn's heart, the night had never been darker. Morning broke with a pale, reluctant light, the kind that did little to chase shadows from the corners of Ashbourne Hall. Evelyn sat at her writing desk, her body heavy from a night without sleep. The jewels she had torn away still lay scattered across the vanity, glittering mockingly in the grey dawn. She stared at them as if they were relics of another life, another woman, one who had believed she could endure anything if she simply held her head high. But something shifted in her chest as she reached for the folded letter hidden among her books. The unfinished words Alexander had written to Catherine stared back at her, blurred slightly where her tears had once fallen. "If I could trade places with you, I would. If I could carry your burden, I would. Instead, I watched you fade, and I—" Her throat tightened. He had written not with cruelty but with desperation, not with disdain but with grief. For weeks she had believed his distance was rejection, but now she saw it for what it truly was: fear. He did not despise her. He loved her too much to risk losing her. The realization pierced her despair, like sunlight through storm clouds. She had been waiting for him to claim her, waiting for him to choose her openly, when all along he had been waiting for permission to forgive himself. Perhaps love was not about perfection or proof. Perhaps love was courage, the courage to hold on even when fear clawed at the heart. Evelyn pressed the letter to her chest, her decision blooming fierce and sudden. She would not let him vanish into silence again. She would not wait for society to decide her worth. She would fight, for him, for herself, for the life that still could be theirs. She rose from her chair, her gown sweeping behind her, and sought him out. She found him in the rose garden, standing alone among the rain-damp petals, his coat dark against the pale blossoms. He looked exhausted, as though nights without rest had hollowed his face. When he turned at the sound of her steps, his eyes flickered with surprise and then wariness. "Evelyn," he said quietly, as though the very name might shatter between them. She did not hesitate. "I have read your words 100 times, she told him, her voice trembling with resolve. "The letter you wrote to Catherine. I know what you carry, Alexander, I know what you fear." His face darkened, his mouth tightening. "You should not—" "I must," she cut in, her hand lifting, "because it is killing us both. You think if you push me away, I will be safe. But I am not safe, Alexander. I am drowning in whispers, in pity, in shame. And all because you will not let yourself believe I am strong enough to stand beside you." He stared at her, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You do not understand. If I let myself love you, if I let myself need you, and fate takes you from me—" His voice broke, raw as an open wound. "It will destroy me." Her tears glistened, but her voice was steady. "Then let it. Let it destroy you, because love worth having will always destroy the life we had before. You think you are protecting me, but you are only protecting your guilt. I am not Catherine. I am Evelyn. And I am here." The silence that followed was thick, their breaths the only sound. Then, slowly, he moved. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling as they brushed hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she closed the distance, pressing his palm flat against her heart. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "It beats still. I am alive. I am yours, if you will only take me." Something broke in him then. The mask he had worn for so long shattered, and what remained was raw, unguarded. His hand slid to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. He lowered his forehead to hers, his breath uneven. "I love you," he confessed, the words torn from his soul. "God help me, I love you, and it terrifies me." Her sob escaped like a prayer. "Then let us be terrified together." And in that moment, he kissed her. It was not the restrained touch of duty, nor the desperate clutch of fear. It was fire and storm and release. His lips claimed hers with hunger long denied, his arms pulling her against him as though he could fuse them into one. Evelyn melted into him, every part of her answering his, her hands tangling in his hair, her body trembling with the weight of all they had endured. When at last they parted, breathless, his eyes shone with something fierce and new. "You are my courage," he whispered. "Without you I am only guilt. With you I can breathe again." The days that followed carried new purpose. For the first time they stood united, not in secrecy, not in silence, but hand in hand. Gossip still swirled, Selina still whispered, but Evelyn no longer felt alone. Alexander attended dinners with her, stood beside her at church, even walked with her in the marketplace where whispers were sharpest. The sight of the Duke and Duchess together sent ripples through society. Whispers turned to doubt. Doubt turned to grudging admiration. Selina did not retreat. If anything, her fury sharpened. At a luncheon, she leaned close to Evelyn, her words soft as silk and venom. "Do you truly believe he has chosen you? He will never rid himself of her ghost. You are nothing more than a placeholder." Evelyn met her gaze calmly, her fingers laced with Alexander's. "Then let his ghost see that I do not fear her, and let society see that he does not walk alone." Selina's smile faltered, just for a breath. Evelyn felt triumph spark in her chest. That night, in the quiet of their chambers, Alexander sat beside her, his hand tracing idle patterns along her wrist. "You saved me," he murmured. She turned her head, her voice gentle but firm. "No, Alexander. We saved each other." And as they lay together beneath the hush of midnight, Evelyn knew the turning point had come. The darkness that had nearly broken them was not gone, but it no longer ruled them. Love had. The next test loomed, Selina's final strike, society's last judgment. But Evelyn was no longer afraid. Whatever storm awaited, she and Alexander would face it together. The season's final ball was to be the grandest of them all, hosted at the Crawfords' gilded estate. Invitations had been dispatched weeks earlier, each bearing the promise of spectacle, and society had waited with bated breath to see if the Duchess of Ashbourne would dare to appear. Evelyn dressed in ivory silk trimmed with gold, her gown a deliberate choice. No mask, no distraction. She would face the world barefaced, unashamed. Margaret fastened pearls at her throat, and as Evelyn looked into the mirror, she no longer saw the frightened bride abandoned on her wedding night. She saw a duchess who had survived whispers, humiliation, and despair. She saw a woman who loved a man not for his title, but for his broken, beating heart. When Alexander entered her chamber, already dressed in black and white with his signet ring gleaming at his hand, he paused at the sight of her. His eyes softened, his jaw tightening as though holding back words. Finally he extended his arm. "Shall we?" he asked. Evelyn slipped her hand into his, their fingers interlacing, and nodded. Together. The Crawfords' estate glittered like a palace. Chandeliers blazed, candles reflected in gilded mirrors, violins sang as couples spun across the floor. Yet as soon as Alexander and Evelyn stepped inside, silence rippled outward. Every head turned, every whisper sharpened. For weeks they had been the scandal of London. Now they were its entertainment. Lady Selina descended the grand staircase in crimson silk, her diamonds sparkling, her smile a serpent's coil. "Your Graces," she purred, her voice carrying across the room. "How brave of you to join us." Evelyn's spine remained straight, her smile calm. "How could we resist such hospitality?" Selina's gaze flickered, irritation flashing before her mask returned. "Hospitality, yes, but also truth. It is time, I think, that society knows what truly happened to poor Catherine. They deserve to understand the kind of man their Duke really is." A murmur surged through the crowd, like the first growl of a storm. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She felt Alexander stiffen beside her, his breath sharp. He would not defend himself, she knew. He never did. Guilt had made him silent too long. Selina lifted a folded paper high. "A letter," she announced, "written by Catherine herself in the final days of her life. A plea for comfort unanswered. A wife abandoned by her husband's cold neglect." Gasps erupted. Fans fluttered, voices hissed, eyes burned. The room tilted. Evelyn stepped forward before Alexander could move, her voice ringing out clear and unwavering. "That letter is a forgery." The crowd hushed. Selina's smile froze. Evelyn's heart thundered, but she pressed on, her voice steady. "I have seen my husband's grief. I have held the words he wrote to Catherine with my own hands, words not of cruelty, but of sorrow. He did not abandon her. He blamed himself, as men so often do when fate steals what they love most. This," she gestured to the letter in Selina's hand, is nothing but the desperate work of a woman who cannot bear to be overlooked." Selina's face flushed, her composure cracking. "You dare—" "Yes," Evelyn cut in, her eyes blazing. "I dare, because I am his wife, because I know the truth. You would see him ruined to satisfy your envy, but I will not allow it. I will not let your lies destroy what grief has already scarred." The room erupted in murmurs, the tide shifting, suspicion turning from Alexander to Selina. Evelyn felt the weight of every gaze, but she did not falter. She reached for Alexander's hand, entwining her fingers with his, lifting them high. "You want a scandal?" she declared, her voice rising above the clamour. "Then here it is. I love my husband. He loves me. And together we will not be broken by your venom." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alexander's breath shuddered beside her. For the first time he stepped forward, not as the silent duke, but as the man who had hidden too long. His arm wrapped around Evelyn, pulling her close, his voice carrying across the hall. "My wife speaks the truth. I failed Catherine not with cruelty but with absence. It is a wound I will bear all my life. But I will not let it damn me, and I will not let it touch Evelyn. She is my courage, my salvation, and if anyone dares speak her name with scorn again, they will answer to me." The crowd gasped again, but this time the sound was different, awed, unsettled, shifted. The Duke had spoken, the Duchess had defended. Together they stood, unshaken. Selina, trembling with fury, crumpled the forged letter in her hand. Her smile was gone, her triumph shattered. She hissed something under her breath and swept from the room, her crimson skirts trailing like spilled blood. In her wake, the music faltered, then resumed, timid at first, then swelling stronger. Whispers shifted to admiration, to speculation, to grudging respect. Evelyn felt the weight lifting from her chest. She turned to Alexander, her eyes brimming with tears, her body trembling with the release of it all. He cupped her face in his hands, heedless of the crowd. "You saved me again," he whispered, his voice breaking. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No, we saved each other." And before the eyes of all society he kissed her. It was not a chaste kiss, nor one meant for politics. It was real, raw, and undeniable. Gasps rose, but no one dared interrupt. The Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne had reclaimed their truth. Later, as they left the ballroom hand in hand, Evelyn leaned against him, her heart steady for the first time in months. Outside, the night air was crisp, the stars glittering above. Alexander drew her close, his lips brushing her hair. "Whatever storms come," he murmured, "I will not leave you again." "And I will not let you," she whispered back. Together, they stepped into the waiting carriage, the door closing on the scandal, the lies, the shadows. Ahead lay the long road of healing, of learning to trust, of daring to love without fear. But they would walk it side by side. For the first time since their wedding night, Evelyn believed in forever. The following weeks unfolded with the rhythm of a new beginning. Scandal sheets that once painted Evelyn as a discarded bride now sang of her defiance, her poise, her courage. The Duchess who defended her Duke, one headline read, accompanied by a sketch of her standing tall in Lady Selina's ballroom. For once the ink was not poisoned. For once, Evelyn was not the subject of pity, but of reluctant admiration. Alexander watched the tide turn with quiet astonishment. He had expected ruin, exile, a life lived in shadows. Instead, his wife had pulled him into the light, and with that light came a peace he had long believed lost. But healing was not immediate. Some nights, Evelyn woke to find him restless beside her, his brow damp with sweat, his lips murmuring Catherine's name in half-formed dreams. She would lay her hand against his chest, grounding him, whispering softly until his breathing steadied. Other nights, he rose and walked the halls until dawn, haunted by ghosts that no vow could banish. Yet each time when she reached for him, he did not turn away. That, she knew, was victory. In return, he began to open the corners of himself he had once kept locked. He took her riding across the estate, showing her the fields where he had run wild as a boy, the pond where he had first learned to swim, The oak tree beneath which his father had told him what it meant to bear a title. He shared memories not of guilt but of life. Slowly the shadows receded. One afternoon, as spring unfurled blossoms across the gardens, Evelyn found Alexander in the nursery, a room long closed, its windows shuttered. Dust lay thick across the cradle, the rocking chair, the faded wallpaper of painted moons. For a moment he only stood there, his shoulders taut, his hands trembling at his sides. Then he whispered, "I have not set foot here since—" She slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "Then we will step inside together." He turned to her, his eyes wet. "Are you certain?" "I am." They crossed the threshold hand in hand. The room smelled of dust and memory, yet as sunlight streamed through the newly opened shutters, it seemed to breathe again. Evelyn touched the edge of the cradle, her fingers brushing wood worn smooth. "This is not a tomb," she whispered. "It is a promise waiting to be fulfilled." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath shuddering. "With you, perhaps it can be." That night, their love was not born of desperation, but of choice. Their bodies met with reverence, with tenderness, with the fierce joy of two souls who had survived the storm and refused to let fear rule them. Evelyn felt his heart beating against hers, no longer burdened only by grief, but alive with hope. Weeks later, at a dinner hosted in their honor, the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne entered together, hand in hand. Evelyn's gown shimmered like moonlight, Alexander's presence radiated command, and for the first time the whispers were not of scandal, but of respect. They danced, and the room watched, not with pity, but with awe. Selina was there, of course, her smile brittle, her eyes sharp, yet she no longer held power. Society had shifted, the tide had turned, and she was left stranded on the wrong shore. She offered a curtsy edged with venom, but Evelyn only inclined her head with serene dismissal. No words were needed, the battle was won. Later, as they rode home beneath a canopy of stars, Alexander lifted Evelyn's hand to his lips, his kiss lingering. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Regret? Choosing me, bearing my shame, facing them all when you could have walked away?" She smiled, her heart full. "I did not choose your shame, Alexander. I chose you, and I would choose you 1,000 times more." His eyes glistened, his voice rough. "Then I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that choice." Seasons turned. Summer gilded the estate in green, autumn painted the trees in fire, winter brought quiet nights before the hearth. Their marriage, once a battlefield, became a partnership. They quarreled, yes, over stubborn pride, over the demands of society, over the sharp edges of two strong wills, but always they returned to one another, bound not by duty, but by love. And then came spring again. Evelyn stood in the gardens, the scent of roses drifting on the breeze, when she felt his arms encircle her from behind. He pressed his lips to her temple, his hand splaying across her stomach. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice trembling with wonder, "is it true?" She covered his hand with hers, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, it is true." He turned her gently, his gaze searching hers, his expression a mixture of joy and fear. "I will not lose you," he vowed fiercely. She cupped his face in her hands. "You will not. This time, we face it together." His lips met hers, tender and reverent, sealing the promise. In the months that followed, Ashbourne Hall came alive again. The nursery was reopened, its shutters thrown wide, its walls repainted with colours of hope. Servants bustled with joy, society softened its gaze, and the Duke who had once been branded haunted became known as a man reborn. On the night their child was born, Alexander wept openly, cradling the tiny bundle against his chest, his tears falling into downy hair. "You saved me," he whispered to Evelyn, his voice breaking with gratitude. "Both of you saved me." Evelyn, exhausted but radiant, reached for him, her heart swelling with love so fierce it hurt. "No," she whispered back, her hand resting on theirs. "We saved each other." And so it was, that a marriage born of necessity, marred by scandal, and nearly destroyed by fear, blossomed into something stronger than either had dared hope. Love did not erase their scars, it honored them. Love did not banish their ghosts, it taught them to live alongside them. Lady Evelyn Harcourt, once the discarded bride, and Alexander, Duke of Ashbourne, once the haunted widower, became not a tale of tragedy but of triumph. And when the world whispered of them now, it was not in pity nor scandal, but in awe of a love that had survived shame, grief, and despair to bloom anew. For Evelyn knew the truth. Love was not perfection. Love was courage, and she had chosen courage every day until courage, at last, chose her back.